Greg Gutfeld is a comedian on Fox News, and he's really fucking unfunny. I was gonna say that he's never made me laugh before, but then I realized actually once he made me laugh. Ages ago, I was watching Fox and he made some kind of joke, and I can't remember what the joke was, but I was like, that's a decent joke. Maybe in his spare time he's actually funny, but when he worked at Fox, he is just the least funny, smarmy fuck. All he does is just smirk and make some derogatory remark about liberals, and that's his whole shtick. He doesn't do anything else. And he just sort of mixes words together into these stupid metaphors that are meant to sound witty and funny. I guess kind of like Dennis Miller, who's another shitty conservative comedian. They try and riff like, oh, you know, terrorists are the new needles and everything's a haystack, but the liberals don't know about how to farm or something. And you're like, that's not funny. But that's conservative comedians for you. But unfortunately, they also let him have opinions and give opinions about stuff, which would be fine, whereas opinions not so stupid. And we're going to talk about one of them today. I was browsing around on the interwebs and came across this video on Media Matters, and that's the video I'm using. So in it, Juan Williams, who's kind of like the resident liberal dude, gets in a fight with Greg Gutfeld about guns. Juan's an alright dude, like he's kind of reasonable as far as Fox News goes, but that's basically the threshold or the bar for like a liberal person on Fox News. They're just reasonable. And reasonable is enough to just be way out there on Fox, because they're so used to sitting around listening to everybody else have these fucked up opinions that don't make any sense whatsoever. The moment you get in like a liberal guy like Juan Williams, who's just liberal-ish, he's not the most liberal guy in the world, they're like, fucking Juan, you're out of control. Calm down, man. Jesus, you're being reasonable. This is Fox. You're not allowed to be reasonable on Fox. So they're having this little argument, and there's two things I want to point out before we get started. So the first thing I want to point out is this fallacy, which is called the fallacy of relative privation. What this means is that you are separating the issue that you're currently talking about by talking about a different issue, which is like larger and more nebulous, and saying therefore the original issue doesn't actually have any validity and you can't really talk about it. So a good example would be, say you went outside, you had a look around and you're like, well, it's a beautiful day today. Wonderful weather. And you talk to your friend and you're like, hey man, don't you reckon the weather's real good today? And he was like, dude, the climate is way worse than the weather. The climate is fucked up. This whole earth is warming. It's turning into a horrible fucking mess. And here you are, sitting around talking about the fucking weather. And you're like, well, man, I'm just talking about the weather. I just think like I like the sun. Like, don't you like the sun? Yeah, I like the sun, but not in the context of the fucking climate. Jesus, man, the sun is a problem. We're all gonna die because of the sun. I can't believe you're my friend. Spending all your time fucking apologizing for the climate. You're an apologist. You're a climate apologist. You fucking punk. And then he punches you in the face. Like, that is the fallacy of relative privation, and it's going to be in liberal use by the non-liberal in this clip. The second thing that I want to point out is that this conversation is supposed to be about guns. That's what they were talking about. The conversation was about guns. And look at how Greg Gutfeld just takes this issue and just twists it to his conservative agenda. We're talking about guns? Oh yeah? I'll show you. So let's have a look at what these guys have to say.
This is a reoccurring, they took the war on terror and they turned it into a war on immigration.
What do you mean? Are you talking about this man and this woman who were Muslims, who were Americans, kind of, got into the country? She came from Saudi Arabia, so I guess they could have checked her a little bit. But him, he was an American. The immigration of what? Of just anyone from the Middle East? So it's total... Instantly, it's nonsense. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? All right, let's go on.
They see the war on terror and they turn it into a gun control issue. By turning this into a gun issue, Juan, you pay less attention to the real threat. This is not about mass shooting. This was an act of terrorism.
Okay, I have to stop it there quickly because this point is important in how not important it is. So he's saying, you know, this is not a mass shooting. This is terrorism. But to that I would say, Okay, so how do the dimensions change when you label it terrorism? I understand that like words have effect and they have meaning when you're talking about like legal issues or things that really need clarity for the sake of the law or for the sake of what something is. But if you take this specific instance, when you had a Muslim man who was American and a Muslim woman who came from Saudi Arabia a few years ago, I'm not sure exactly when, they legally bought guns and they went out and they used all these guns to shoot lots of people dead. And they had a harmful and negative ideology, and that was radical Islam, because they were radicalized, I guess, by ISIS or by ISIL or just whatever, fundamentalist readings of the Quran. Take your pick. It doesn't actually really matter. They were just radicalized, you know? It matters if we're talking about like the global war on terror. That's a big problem. But this conversation, at least as it was put forth by Juan Williams, is about guns. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about guns right now. And in those terms, it has exactly the same dimensions as any other shooting, as a guy who was influenced by misogyny, as somebody who was influenced by hatred of black people, somebody who was influenced by just anything, hatred of their workmates, anything you can think of that makes a person violent. They went out there, they got their hands on a gun. And people say there's a big difference between whether they get the guns illegally or whether they get their hands on them non-legally. But I think it actually isn't that big a deal, because a lot of these shooters just go out and the gun's just lying on the table and they pick it up, and I guess that's like illegal because they don't have a permit, but there's no one there to stop them. It's just right there. They just pick it up. And when they get it legally, they go in and they don't get a background check. They walk up and say, hey, you know, I want to have this gun. They have to do a little bit of paperwork. They have to do some procedures. I know that people who are obsessed with guns are going to correct me and be like, actually, I had to do a lot of work to get my gun and it was quite rigorous. Well, if that's the case, then you won't have any problem with extra laws that are just going to like help it move along a little bit for the people that fall through the cracks, not for you. We're not talking about laws for the same good people, which is you guys. You good, awesome gun owners that everybody loves. We're not talking about you. We're talking about these shitty fucking terrorists. And yeah, lots of different kinds of terrorists. You know, even just racist terrorists and white terrorists and Muslim terrorists. We're just talking about all terrorists. We don't want them to have guns, you know. One way that you do that is background checks. And another thing which is going to come up in this conversation is about the no-fly list, which inexplicably conservatives are saying people on the no-fly list should have access to guns. Now, for a long time, liberals have been saying we have a problem with the no-fly list because they arbitrarily put people on it through profiling, and that's not really fair. And I agree. They should look at that. They should be like, is this person actually suspect and should they be on the no-fly list? But that is completely thrown out the window and totally contradicted by conservatives who are like, if you're on the no-fly list, we still want you to have a gun. We are suspicious enough of you to put you on the no-fly list due to your Muslimness, but we are still willing to give you a gun, because that's the only thing that matters, a gun. You just need a gun. And that's the thing that really shines through in this conversation with Greg Gutfeld. Guns, 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 guns. I don't care about anything else. If you try to do anything to take away guns, you're a fucking monster.
It's saying it's a mass shooting tells America to worry less about perhaps the biggest, greatest threat to civilization.
Climate change. Smart. I didn't expect that out of you, Greg, but that's good. You're learning. And then there'll be issues with food shortages and natural disasters, that kind of thing. Good thinking.
The threat that's going to affect your grandkids, Juan, long after you're gone.
Well, I think it's an important issue, but I don't know for sure how much man is contributing to climate change. It could be we're contributing a lot. It could be that it's a natural cycle, but I definitely think it's better to play safe with something this important. And we need to get off dirty energy sources like oil anyways, because they also play into this whole terrorism deal with like the relationship with Saudi Arabia and the fact that ISIL has oil fields, you know. If we didn't rely on oil so much, that could definitely help. So maybe Greg's got some good solutions there.
They may not make it because of this threat. This act splits the politics into two camps.
A good point there. Many congressmen and women receive funding and campaign contributions from energy corporations. And so they have a vested interest in not paying carbon taxes or having any regulations on their business. And this definitely contributes to global warming, and we need to look at a way to get off this. So that definitely splits politicians right down the middle, like an axe, into two different camps. So that's a good point by Greg.
You have one that screams for mass shootings. This is mass shootings. You have another that says Islamic terror.
Oh, shit. You're talking about shootings and terror still. Sorry, I thought you went on to something else.
So let's do the math. Which is worse? A mass shooter, in the end, is self-limiting. They will shoot a lot of people. In the end, they either commit suicide or they're shot. It's finite. It's over until another one happens.
I actually thought he had a pretty good point there. It is finite. At a certain point, he runs out of bullets, he gets shot, he commits suicide, something happens. And then that's that. It's over. But I think that entire presentation, that sentence, was completely undermined by the last part, which was, until another one happens. And that was so flippant. Just like, it's finite, it's over, it's finished, you know, it doesn't really, it's not the end of the world, then another one happens, or whatever. And anyways, on to my next point.
A terrorist, when they create an act, it's to create a further act, to beget a greater terror.
Yeah, but this is coming to the real crux of the situation. He's like, there's a big difference between a mass shooter and a terrorist, because a terrorist wants to create something bigger than themselves. While this may be true, I'm pretty sure that that Muslim man and woman, despite all the crazy shit they had going on in their heads, are dead, and they can't really do anything else. And maybe they can inspire some other shooters, but if you look at mass shootings, they have the same characteristics, because lots of mass shooters inspire other mass shooters. So Elliot Rodgers, for example, who was a misogynist and killed some people because he hates women, and he also hated men because they got the women that he couldn't get, he inspired lots of people to feel really fucking angry at women and just share his hatred. I'm not saying those people went out and shot people, but he inspired people to feel that way. And I saw it all over the internet. People saying, I feel miserable too. I don't want to turn into Elliot Rodger, but sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel like I just want to go out there and get revenge, you know. And so he inspired them, and he was classed as a mass shooter because misogyny is not specific enough in the minds of like Westerners as like Islamic or Muslim terrorism. That's a lot more scary. But literally the same thing happened. Elliot Rodger went out. That man and woman, they went out. Elliot Rodger shot a whole bunch of people. Those two people shot a whole bunch of people. He had crazy fucked up thoughts. She had crazy fucked up thoughts. They both had access to guns. They shot a whole bunch of people. Then they fucking died. It's like, what's the difference between Elliot Rodger and these two people? But my friend, who's very smart, I said this was just semantics between like terrorism and mass shooting, and he was like, it's not just semantics, like it's very important. And I do agree that it's very important for a specific legal kind of framework. It's important, but when exactly the same event basically happens, it's just like a different point of view. Like one is for misogyny, one is for being a Muslim terrorist, and the same thing happens. Each are gonna inspire some people. Obviously, there's more Muslims in the world than misogynists. Well, God, I hope so. Yeah, it's gonna inspire other people. And the distinction here between mass shooter and terrorist, I think, is completely irrelevant to whether they should restrict access to guns. So it's a complete red herring. And I think Greg's insistence that this is terrorism and saying that we have to focus on terrorism instead of guns is very stupid and pointless, because they were mass shooters and terrorists. They're not mutually exclusive. Like, why, when something is terrorism, does that automatically cancel the need out for gun control? Because you're like, that's fine, they're terrorists. Oh, terrorists, yeah, we don't have to check them. Like, they can have guns, that's fine. Yeah, no problem. No, I would expect that you would have rigorous methods for checking who should have guns. Terrorist or not, sane or insane, we should check everybody. Because then we'll find out if they're insane. We'll find out if they're a terrorist. And then they shouldn't have a fucking gun. It's not complicated.